Hello, hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, starting with part 3, chapter 26. But first, reading updates. I am reading The Wager by David Grann. I am like almost there. I'm like 100 pages left in it, and it's about a ship who that is trying to find the Spanish galleon, which is like the treasure of all of the seas, and a lot of terrible things happen. Like just terrible. I don't think one good thing happens to this crew or this ship. And so I'm enjoying it. There are excerpts from letters and from journals and things like that, so that's kind of cool that you have that like primary source that we're digging into. And I am also listening to, I forgot the author, it's fine, but I'm listening to Martyr, and so far so good. I don't really think I am far enough into it to be able to say what it's about, and I don't even remember why I have it. I put it on hold both as a physical book and as an audiobook to see like what would come in faster. And the audiobook came in, but it's been so long ago that I put it on hold that I don't even remember like how I heard of this or why I put it on hold. So it's a surprise for all of us. But so far so good. The narrator is doing a good job. And I think that's it. I think that's it. But today we are here for Anna Karenina. We're starting with part 3, chapter 26, and what happened last time, a bunch of things. I'm going to try to just stick with the high notes and not get too lost in the weeds because as we're reading, things will be popping up. Um, Tolstoy does a really good job of like reminding us of things that have happened, so I don't feel the need to go too much into it. But last time, previously on, we have Anna. Well, we mostly are with Vronsky, and Vronsky has a like he is thinking about, okay, holy heck, what am I gonna do now? Anna like doesn't want to leave her husband. Should I leave my job? Should I stay with my job? I am this old. People my same age who have joined the like armed forces at the same time are now with families and now, higher ranked, and I have been passed by promotions and things like that. What am I going to do? And we also get Anna's husband's perspective, Alexei, and he is like, well, I'm not going to duel because what if I get hurt? I'm not going to divorce because then she can go and be with Vronsky and be happily ever after. I'm not going to separate because then she can go and be with Vronsky and be happy ever after. So we're going to stay married in the same house and nothing is going to change. And he tells Anna this. Anna is like, oh me, oh my. Yes, I wanted everything to go back to like where I could just like take the words back. However, I didn't like the way things were. I didn't like the old way, and now it's gonna be so much worse because we're gonna have this hanging over our heads. So she tells Vronsky, Vronsky's like, obviously we need to duel. In his head, that's what he's thinking. Obviously, I need to duel with Alexei, and I may or may not, be okay. I'm gonna aim wide, but what if Alexei doesn't? And Alexei was having the same thoughts, like I'm gonna aim wide, but what if Vronsky doesn't? Blah blah blah. And then we also go to Levin, and Levin is like, woe is me, I am the biggest sad sack on the planet because somebody said no to me. So I am going to live the simple life of a peasant and laborer. And then along comes Kitty. She is staying with her sister Daria, also in the country. And he's like, just kidding. Kitty is the love of my life. Great. But I can't go see her because awkward. So I'm not even going to write letters to her. I'm not going to visit her. Oh, she needs a saddle for her horse. Great. I'm just going to send it with no note. And I think that might be where we left off. Let's see. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, and Levin was very judgy about all of the families. Daria's family because they're spoiled, and then also this like laborer that he went to go see judging their family as well. Mm, okay, I think that's it. I think part 3, chapter 26. Vyashsky was the marshal of his district. He was 5 years older than Levin and had long been married. His sister-in-law, a young girl Levin liked very much, lived in his house, and Levin knew that Zviasky and his wife would have greatly liked to marry the girl to him. He knew this with certainty, as so-called eligible young men always know it, though he could never have brought himself to speak of it to anyone, and he knew that too, although he wanted to get married, and although by every token this very attractive girl would make an excellent wife, he could no more have married her, even if he had not been in love with Kitty Sherbatskaya. Then he could have flown up to the sky, and this knowledge poisoned the pleasure he had hoped to find in the visit to Sviazhsky. On getting Sviazhsky's letter with the invitation for shooting, Levin had immediately thought of this, but in spite of it he had made up his mind that Sviazhsky's having such views for him was simply his own groundless supposition, and so he would go, all the same. Besides, at the bottom of his heart he had his desire to try himself, put himself to the test in regard to this girl. The Sviazhsky's home life was exceedingly pleasant, and Sviazhsky himself, the best type of man taking part in local affairs that Levin knew, was very interesting to him. Sviazhsky was one of those people, always a source of wonder to Levin, whose convictions, very logical though never original, go one way by themselves, while their life, exceedingly definite and firm in its direction, goes its way quite apart and almost always in direct contradiction to their convictions. Sviazhsky was an extremely advanced man. He despised the nobility, and believed the mass of the nobility to be secretly in favor of serfdom, and only concealing their views from cowardice. He regarded Russia as a ruined country, rather after the style of Turkey, and the government of Russia as so bad that he never permitted himself to criticize its doings seriously, and yet he was a functionary of that government, and a model marshal of nobility, and when he drove about he always wore the cockade of office and the cap with the red band. He considered human life only tolerable abroad, and went abroad to stay at every opportunity. And at the same time, he carried on a complex and improved system of agriculture in Russia, and with extreme interest followed everything, and knew everything that was being done in Russia. He considered the Russian peasant as occupying a stage of development intermediate between the ape and the man, and at the same time in the local assemblies, no one was readier to shake hands with the peasants and listen to their opinion. He believed neither in God nor the devil, but was much concerned about the question of the improvement of the clergy and the maintenance of their revenues, and took special trouble to keep up the church in his village. On the woman question, he was on the side of the extreme advocates of complete liberty for women, and especially their right to labor. But he lived with his wife on such terms that their affectionate, childless home life was the admiration of everyone, and arranged his wife's life so that she did nothing, and could do nothing but share her husband's efforts, that her time should pass as happily and as agreeably as possible. If it had not been a characteristic of Levin's to put the most favorable interpretation on people, Sviazhsky's character would have presented no doubt or difficulty to him. He would have said to him, a fool, or a knave, and everything would have seemed clear. But he could not say a fool, because Sviashki was unmistakably clever, and moreover a highly cultivated man who was exceptionally modest over his culture. There was not a subject he knew nothing of, but he did not display his knowledge except when he was compelled to do so. Still less could Levin say that he was a knave, as Sviashki was unmistakably an honest, good-hearted, sensible man who worked good-humoredly, keenly, and perseveringly at his work. He was held in high honor by everyone about him, and certainly he had never consciously done, and was indeed incapable of doing, anything base. Levin tried to understand him, and could not understand him, and looked at him and his life as at a living enigma. Levin and he were very friendly, and so Levin used to venture to sound Sviashki to try to get at the very foundation of his view of life, but it was always in vain. Every time Levin tried to penetrate beyond the outer chambers of Sviashki's mind, which were hospitably open to all, he noticed that Sviashki was slightly disconcerted. Faint signs of alarm were visible in his eyes, as though he were afraid Levin would understand him, and he would give him a kindly, good-humored repulse. Just now, since his disenchantment with farming, Levin was particularly glad to stay with Sviashki, apart from the fact that the sight of his happy and affectionate couple, so pleased with themselves and everyone else, and their well-ordered home had always a cheering effect on Levin. He felt a longing, now that he was so dissatisfied with his own life, to get at that secret in Sviashki that gave him such clearness, definiteness, and good courage in life. Moreover, Levin knew that at Sviashki's he should meet the landowner of the neighborhood, and it was particularly interesting for him just now to hear and take part in those rural conversations concerning crops, laborers' wages, and so on, which, he was aware, are conventionally regarded as something very low, but which seemed to him just now to constitute the one subject of importance. It was not, perhaps, of importance in the days of serfdom, and it may not be of importance in England. In both cases, the conditions of agriculture are firmly established. But among us now, when everything has been turned upside down and is only just taking shape, the question what form these conditions will take is the one question of importance in Russia, thought Levin. The shooting turned out to be worse than Levin had expected. The marsh was dry, and there were no grouse at all. He walked about the whole day and only brought back 3 birds. But to make up for that, he brought back, as he always did from shooting, an excellent appetite, excellent spirits, and that keen, intellectual mood which with him always accompanied violent physical exertion. And while out shooting, when he seemed to be thinking of nothing at all, suddenly the old man and his family kept coming back to his mind, and the impression of them seemed to claim not merely his attention, but the solution of some question connected with them. In the evening at tea, 2 landowners who had come about some business connected with a wardship were of the party, and the interesting conversation Levin had been looking forward to sprang up. Levin was sitting beside his hostess at the tea-table, and was obliged to keep up a conversation with her and her sister, who was sitting opposite them. Madame Zviashkaya was a round-faced, fair-haired, rather short woman, all smiles and dimples. Levin tried through her to get a solution of the weighty enigma her husband presented to his mind, but he had not complete freedom of ideas, because he was in an agony of embarrassment. This agony of embarrassment was due to the fact that the sister-in-law was sitting opposite to him, in a dress, specially put on, as he fancied, for his benefit, cut particularly open in the shape of a trapeze on her white bosom. This quadrangular opening, in spite of the bosom's being very white, or just because it was very white, deprived Levin of the full use of his faculties. He imagined, probably mistakenly, that this low-necked bodice had been made on his account, and felt that he had no right to look at it, and tried not to look at it, but he felt that he was to blame for the very fact of the low-necked bodice having been made. It seemed to Levin that he had deceived someone, that he ought to explain something, but that to explain it was impossible, and for that reason he was continually blushing, was ill at ease and awkward. His awkwardness infected the pretty sister-in-law, too. But their hostess appeared not to observe this, and kept purposely drawing her into the conversation. "You say," she said, pursuing the subject that had been started, "that my husband cannot be interested in what's Russian. It's quite the contrary. He is always in perfect spirits abroad, but not as he is here. Here he feels in his proper place. He has so much to do, and he has the faculty of interesting himself in everything. Oh, you've not been to see our school, have you?" "I've seen it. The little house covered with ivy, isn't it?" "Yes, that's Nastya's work," she said, indicating her sister. "You teach in it yourself?" asked Levin, trying to look above the open neck, but feeling that wherever he looked in that direction he should see it. "Yes, I used to teach in it myself, and do teach still, but we have a first-rate schoolmistress now, and we've started gymnastic exercises." "No, thank you. I won't have any more tea," said Levin, and conscious of doing a rude thing, but incapable of continuing the conversation, he got up, blushing. "I hear a very interesting conversation," he added, and walked to the other end of the table, where Sviazhsky was sitting with the two gentlemen of the neighborhood. Sviazhsky was sitting sideways, with one elbow on the table and a cup in one hand, while with the other hand he gathered up his beard, held it to his nose, and let it drop again, as though he were smelling it. His brilliant black eyes were looking straight at the excited country gentleman with grey whiskers, and apparently he derived amusement from his remarks. The gentleman was complaining of the peasants. It was evident to Levin that Sviazhsky knew in answer to this gentleman's complaints, which would at once demolish his whole contention, but that in his position he could not give utterance to this answer, and listened, not without pleasure, to the landowner's comic speeches. The gentleman with the grey whiskers was obviously an inveterate adherent to serfdom and a devoted agriculturist, who had lived all his life in the country. Levin saw proofs of this in his dress, in the old-fashioned threadbare coat, obviously not his everyday attire, in his shrewd, deep-set eyes, in his idiomatic, fluent Russian, in the imperious tone that had become habitual from long use, and in the resolute gestures of his large, red, sunburnt hands, with an old betrothal ring on the little finger. End of chapter 26. Okay, chapter 26, we have new characters. It had been too long since we added new characters, so Tolstoy's like, here you go. So we have new characters. We have, did we get the wife's name? We did. I don't remember her name, though. We have Sviazhsky, his wife, her sister, and some other guy that I immediately forgot his name. I'm hoping that they're not important. That they're only here for like a few chapters and then they scurry about. But Levin, woe is me, is now having dinner, having tea at Sviazhsky's place, and it's after he's been working. He knows that the like laborer life isn't necessarily for him, and he went out shooting. He wasn't able to bring anything back. And so he was like, but I brought an appetite. So he goes there, and Sviashki's wife is there, and so is her sister. And she is wearing a very low cut dress. And Levin, of course, notices. And he's trying so hard not to notice. And it's making him so uncomfortable. And he's assuming that she's wearing this dress because she knew that he would be there. And it's like a little like, oh, have you met my sister? And the wife keeps bringing her sister into the conversation as like a, oh, but my sister does this and my sister does that or whatever. And Levin is just getting kind of tired of it. And so there's like a point where he's like, no, I'm not going to have any more tea. And then he just does like a faux pas, and he's like, actually, there's an interesting conversation going on over there. And he gets up and he goes and hangs out with um Zviasky. Zviashki. And Zviasky is listening to what this other guy is talking about, and they are talking about peasants, and the guy has very strong opinions, and we are looking at Zviashki and noticing that he does not agree, but is not like partaking in this, and we being Levin know that Zviashki would very easily be able to just like say one sentence that would shut down everything that this guy is saying, but he's not. He's just listening. Also, we did get some information about Zviashki. He is the what is he? He's like head of the district, and he is in politics but doesn't like politics, and he believes that women should be created equal, especially in the workforce. But his wife does not work; she stays at home, and they do not have children. And he just wants her to stay at home and be happy and live a happy life without having to work. You know, he's able to provide for her. And what else did we know? He doesn't like nobility, even though he is by default, because of his position, part of nobility. So there are some like contradictions in. I mean, they're not necessarily contradictions. They're more like ands. Like, I believe this and I do this type of a thing, rather than I believe this, but it's okay for my wife to do that. Like, I don't think that that's what is coming across, I think. I feel like out of all of the characters, Levin is my least favorite. Levin is my least favorite. Like all of the other characters, even when they're doing like not amazing things or what have you, like the waters are muddied, we're living in the gray area. I feel like their redeeming characters or their redeeming characteristics and traits are more weighty than Levin's. But, you know, it's still early, you know? Chapter 27. I'd only the heart to throw up what's been set going. Such a lot of trouble wasted. I'd turn my back on the whole business. Set up, go off like Nikolai Ivanovitch to hear La Belle Helene, said the landowner, a pleasant smile lighting up his shrewd old face. But you see you don't throw it up, said Nikolai Ivanovitch Sviashki. So there must be something gained. The only gain is that I live in my own house, neither bought nor hired. Besides, one keeps hoping the people will learn sense. Though, instead of that, you'd never believe it. The drunkenness, the immorality. They keep chopping and changing their bits of land. Not a sight of a cow or a horse. The peasant's dying of hunger, but just go and take him on as a laborer. He'll do his best to do you a mischief, and then bring you up before the justice of the peace. But then you make complaints to the justice too, said Sviashki. I lodge complaints? Not for anything in the world. Such a talking and such a to-do that one would have cause to regret it. At the works, for instance, they pocketed the advance money and made off. What did the justice do? Why, acquitted them. Nothing keeps them in order but their own communal court and their village elder. He'll flog them in the good old style. But for that there'd be nothing for it but to give it all up and run away. Obviously, the landowner was chafing Sviashki, who, far from resenting it, was apparently amused by it. "But you see we manage our land without such extreme measures," said he, smiling. "Levin and I and this gentleman." He indicated the other landowner. "Yes, the thing's done at Mikhail Petrovitch's, but ask him how it's done. Do you call that a rational system?" said the landowner, obviously rather proud of the word rational. "My system's very simple," said Mikhail Petrovitch. "Thank God. All my management rests on getting the money ready for the autumn taxes, and the peasants come to me. 'Father, master, help us.' Well, the peasants are all one's neighbors. One feels for them. So one advances them a third, but one says, 'Remember, lads, I have helped you, and you must help me when I need it, whether it's the sowing of the oats, or the hay-cutting, or the harvest,' and, well, one agrees. So much for each taxpayer, though there are dishonest ones among them too, it's true." Levin, who had long been familiar with these patriarchal methods, exchanged glances with Sviashki, and interrupted Mikhail Petrovitch, turning again to the gentleman with the grey whiskers. "Then what do you do?" he asked. "What system is one to adopt nowadays?" "Why, manage like Mikhail Petrovitch, or let the land for half the crop, or for rent, to the peasants. That one can do, only that's just how the general prosperity of the country is being ruined. Where the land, with serf labor and good management, gave yield of 9-1, on the half-crop system it yields 3-1. Russia has been ruined by the emancipation." Sviashki looked with smiling eyes at Levin, and even made a faint gesture of irony to him. But Levin did not think the landowner's words absurd. He understood them better than he did Sviashki. A great deal more of what the gentleman with the grey whiskers said to show in what way Russia was ruined by the emancipation struck him indeed as very true, new to him, and quite incontestable. The landowner unmistakably spoke his own individual thought, a thing that very rarely happens, and a thought to which he had been brought by, not by a desire of finding some exercise for an idle brain, but a thought which had grown up out of the conditions of his life, which he had brooded over in the solitude of his village, and had considered in every aspect. "The point is, don't you see that progress of every sort is only made by the use of authority?" he said, evidently wishing to show he was not without culture. "Take the reforms of Peter, of Catherine, of Alexander. Take European history. And progress in agriculture more than anything else. The potato, for instance, that was introduced among us by force. The wooden plow, too, wasn't always used. It was introduced maybe in the days before the Empire, but it was probably brought in by force. Now, in our own day, we landowners in the serf times used various improvements in our husbandry. Drying machines and thrashing machines and carting manure and all the modern implements, all that we brought into use by our authority, and the peasants opposed it at first, and ended by imitating us. Now, by the abolition of serfdom, we have been deprived of our authority, and so our husbandry, where it had been raised to a high level, is bound to sink to the most savage primitive condition. That's how I see it. But why so? If it's rational, you'll be able to keep up the same system with hired labor, said Zviashki. We've no power over them. With whom am I going to work the system, allow me to ask? There it is. The labor force, the chief element in agriculture, thought Levin. With laborers. The laborers won't work well and won't work with good implements. Our laborer can do nothing but get drunk like a pig, and when he's drunk he ruins everything you give him. He makes the horses ill with too much water, cuts good harness, barters the tires of the wheels for drink, drops bits of iron into the thrashing machine so as to break it. He loathes the sight of anything that's not after his fashion. And that's how it is the whole level of husbandry has fallen. Lands gone out of cultivation, overgrown with weeds or divided among the peasants, and where millions of bushels were raised, you get 100,000. The wealth of the country has decreased. If the same thing had been done, but with care that... As he proceeded to unfold his own scheme of emancipation, by means of which these drawbacks might have been avoided. This did not interest Levin, but when he had finished, Levin went back to his first position and, addressing Zviashki and trying to draw him into expressing his serious opinion that the standard of culture is falling, and that with our present relations to the peasants there is no possibility of farming on a rational system to yield a profit. That's perfectly true, said he. I don't believe it, Zviashki replied quite seriously. All I see is that we don't know how to cultivate the land, and that our system of agriculture in the serf days was by no means too high, but too low. We have no machines, no good stock, no efficient supervision. We don't even know how to keep accounts. Ask any landowner. He won't be able to tell you what crop's profitable and what's not. Italian bookkeeping, said the gentleman of the gray whiskers ironically. You may keep your books as you like, but if they spoil everything for you, there won't be any profit. Why do they spoil things? A poor thrashing machine or your Russian presser they will break. But my steam press they won't break. A wretched Russian nag they'll ruin. But keep good dray horses, they won't ruin them. And so it is all around. We must raise our farming to a higher level. Oh, if one only had the means to do it, Nikolai Ivanovitch, it's all very well for you, but for me, with a son to keep at the university, lads to be educated at the high school, how am I going to buy these dray horses? Well, that's what the land banks are for. To get what's left me sold by auction? No, thank you. I don't agree that it's necessary or possible to raise the level of agriculture still higher, said Levin. I devote myself to it, and I have means, but I can do nothing. As to the banks, I don't know to whom they're any good. For my part, anyway, whatever I've spent money on in the way of husbandry, it has been a loss. Stock, a loss. Machinery, a loss. That's true enough, said the gentleman with the gray whiskers, chimed in, positively laughing with satisfaction. And I'm not the only one, pursued Levin. I mix with all the neighboring landowners who are cultivating their land on a rational system. They all, with rare exceptions, are doing so at a loss. Come, tell us, how does your land do? Does it pay? Said Levin, and at once in Zviashki's eyes he detected that fleeting expression of alarm which he had noticed whenever he had tried to penetrate beyond the outer chambers of Zviashki's mind. Moreover, this question on Levin's part was not quite in good faith. Madame Zviashkaya, who had just told him at tea that they had that summer invited a German expert in bookkeeping from Moscow, who, for a consideration of 500 rubles, had investigated the management of their property, and found that it was costing them a loss of 3,000 odd rubles. She did not remember the precise sum, but it appeared that the German had worked it out to the fraction of a farthing. The grey-whiskered landowner smiled at the mention of the profits of Zviashki's farming, obviously aware how much gain his neighbor and marshal was likely to be making. Possibly it does not pay, answered Zviashki. That merely proves neither that I'm a bad manager or that I've sunk my capital for the increase of my rents. Oh, rent, Levin cried with horror. Rent there may be in Europe, where land has been improved by the labor put into it, but with us all the land is deteriorating from the labor put into it. In other words, they're working it out, so there's no question of rent. How no rent? It's law. Then, we're outside the law. Rent explains nothing for us, but simply muddles us. No, tell me how there can be a theory of rent. Will you have some junket, Masha? Pass us some junket or raspberries. He turned to his wife. Extraordinarily late the raspberries are lasting this year. And in the happiest frame of mind, Zviashka got up and walked off, apparently supposing the conversation to have ended at the very point when to Levin it seemed that it was only just beginning. Having lost his antagonist, Levin continued the conversation with the grey-whiskered landowner, trying to prove to him that all the difficulty arises from the fact that we don't find out the peculiarities and habits of our laborer, but the landowner, like all men who think independently and in isolation, was slow in taking in any other person's idea, and particularly partial to his own. He stuck to it that the Russian peasant is a swine, and likes swinishness, and that to get him out of his swinishness, one must have authority, and there is none. One must have a stick, and we have become so liberal that we have all of a sudden replaced the stick that served us for 1,000 years by lawyers and model prisons, where the worthless, stinking peasant is fed on good soup and has a fixed allowance of cubic feet of air. What makes you think, said Levin, trying to get back to the question, that it's impossible to find some relation to the laborer in which the labor would become productive? That never could be so with the Russian peasantry. We've no power over them, answered the landowner. How can new conditions be found? Said Zviashki. Having eaten some junket and lighted a cigarette, he came back to the discussion. All possible relations of the labor force have been defined and studied, he said. The relic of barbarism, the primitive commune with each guarantee for all, will disappear of itself. Serfdom has been abolished. There remains nothing but free labor, and its forms are fixed and ready-made, and must be adopted. Permanent hands, day laborers, rammers, you can't get out of those forms. But Europe is dissatisfied with these forms, dissatisfied and seeking new ones, and will find them in all probability. That's just what I was meaning, answered Levin. Why shouldn't we seek them for ourselves? Because it would be just like inventing afresh the means of constructing railways. They are ready, invented. But if they don't do for us, if they're stupid, said Levin, and again he detected the expression of alarm in the eyes of Zviashki. Ah, yes, we'll bury the world under our caps. We found the secret Europe was seeking for. I've heard all that, but, excuse me, do you know all that's been done in Europe on the question of the organization of labor? No, very little. That question is now absorbing the best minds in Europe, the Solzhenitsyn movement, and then all this enormous literature of the labor question, the most liberal LaSalle movement, the Mulhausen experiment. That's a fact by now, as you're probably aware. I have a vague idea of it, but very vague. No. You only say that. No doubt you know all about it as well as I do. I'm not a professor of sociology, of course, but it interested me. And really, if it interests you, you ought to study it. But what conclusion have they come to? Excuse me. The two neighbors had risen, and Zviashki, once more checking Levin in his inconvenient habit of peeping into what was beyond the outer chambers of his mind, went to see his guests out. End of chapter 27. Okay. Chapter 27, mostly discussion. It's man talk. They're talking about, the hard times that they're having and they're not being able to turn a profit. And one of the landowners is like, it's because we are no longer ruling with an iron fist. We are no longer forcing our will to the workers, and they just have these freedoms, and so all they're gonna do is get drunk and give too much water to horses and put little bits of lead in things so that it breaks, and like all of these other things, which I don't think that that's gonna happen or has happened. I feel like these are just like extreme cases of stories that you just like read on the internet, like it's that equivalent. um And there's been a couple of times when Zviashki, like a question has come too close, like has, you know, buzzed the tower, and he physically removes himself. And I am almost wondering if this is like a tactic, not to necessarily escape the conversation, but to give him space so that he is able to collect his thoughts, and then be able to talk about it more. Like, yes, there is that, barrier that he has that is evident to Levin and us as the reader, that he doesn't want people to be so close to his personal affairs and his, you know, earnings and things like that. But also, I feel like he is a very intelligent person, and he's not just going to, speak out of like a passion or out of just like a knee-jerk reaction. So I think he's removing himself to take that little time to be like, okay, this is what this person said. It's getting a little heated. I don't want to like just react to it. I'm going to remove myself, collect my thoughts, and then come back. That's how I interpreted it anyway. I'm sure I'm sure there's other interpretations for it to be like, no, he is he just doesn't want to talk about, which fair. But mostly they're talking about the laboring system and the two sides of it. And of course, it's only black and white. There's no nuance ever. All right. Chapter 28. Levin was insufferably bored that evening with the ladies. He was stirred as he had never been before by the idea that the dissatisfaction he was feeling with his system of managing his land was not an exceptional case, but the general condition of things in Russia, that the organization of some relation of the laborers to the soil in which they would work, as with the peasant he had met halfway to the Zviashkis, was not a dream, but a problem which must be solved. And it seemed to him that the problem could be solved, and that he ought to try and solve it. After saying good night to the ladies, and promising to stay the whole of the next day, so as to make an exception on horseback with them to see an expedition, After saying good night to the ladies and promising to stay the whole of the next day, so as to make an expedition on horseback with them to see an interesting ruin in the Crown Forest, Levin went, before going to bed, into his host's study to get the books on the labor question that Sviashki had offered him. Sviashki's study was a huge room, surrounded by bookcases and with 2 tables in it. One a massive writing table, standing in the middle of the room, and the other a round table, covered with recent numbers of reviews and journals in different languages, ranged like the rays of a star round the lamp. On the writing table was a stand of drawers marked with gold lettering and full of papers of various sorts. Sviashki took out the books and sat down in a rocking chair. "What are you looking at there?" he asked. Oh, he said to Levin, who was standing at the round table looking through the reviews. "Ah, yes. There's a very interesting article there," said Sviashki, of the review Levin was holding in his hand. "It appears," he went on with eager interest, "that Friedrich was not, after all, the person chiefly responsible for the partition of Poland. It is proved," and with his characteristic clearness, he summed up those new, very important, and interesting revelations. Although Levin was engrossed at the moment by his ideas about the problem of the land, he wondered, as he heard Sviashki, what is there inside of him? And why? Why is he interested in the partition of Poland? When Sviashki had finished, Levin could not help asking, "Well, and what then?" But there was nothing to follow. It was simply interesting that it had been proved to be so and so. But Sviashki did not explain, and saw no need to explain why it was interesting to him. "Yes, but I was very interested by your irritable neighbor," said Levin, sighing. "He's a clever fellow, and said a lot that was true." "Oh, get along with you, an inveterate supporter of serfdom at heart, like all of them," said Sviashki. "Whose marshal you are?" "Yes, only I marshal them in the other direction," said Sviashki, laughing. "I'll tell you what interests me very much," said Levin. "He's right that our system, that's to say, of rational farming, doesn't answer, that the only thing that answers is the moneylender system, that, like that meek-looking gentleman's, or else the very simplest. Whose fault is it?" "Our own, of course. Besides, it's not true that it doesn't answer. It answers with Vasilitishkov." "A factory. But I really don't know what it is you are surprised at. The people are at such a low stage of rational and moral development. It's obvious they're bound to oppose everything that's strange to them. In Europe, a rational system answers because the people are educated. It follows that we must educate the people. That's all." "But how are we to educate the people?" "To educate the people, 3 things are needed: schools, and schools, and schools." "But you said yourself the people are at such a low stage of material development. What help are schools for that?" "Do you know, you remind me of the story of the advice given to the sick man. You should try purgative medicine. Taken. Worse. Try leeches. Tried them. Worse. Well then, there's nothing left but to pray to God. Tried it. Worse. That's just how it is with us. I say political economy, you say worse. I say socialism, worse. Education, worse. But how do schools help matters? They give the peasant fresh wants." "Well, that's a thing I've never understood," Levin replied with heat. "In what way are schools going to help the people to improve their material position? You say schools, education will give them fresh wants. So much the worse, since they won't be capable of satisfying them. And in what way a knowledge of addition and subtraction and the catechism is going to improve their material condition, I never could make out." The day before yesterday, I met a peasant woman in the evening with a little baby, and asked her where she was going. She said she was going to the wise woman. Her boy had screaming fits, so she was taking him to be doctored. I asked, "What? Why? How does the wise woman cure screaming fits?" She said, "She puts the child on the hen roost and repeats some charm." Well, you're saying it yourself. What's wanted to prevent her taking What's wanted to prevent her taking her child to the hen roost to cure it of screaming fits is just, Zviashki said, smiling good-humoredly. "Oh no," said Levin with annoyance. "That method of doctoring I merely meant as a simile for doctoring the people with schools. The people are poor and ignorant. That we see as surely as the peasant woman sees the baby is ill because it screams. But in what way this trouble of poverty and ignorance is to be cured by schools is as incomprehensible as how the hen roost affects the screaming. What has to be cured is what makes him poor." Well, in that, at least, you are in agreement with Spencer, whom you dislike so much. He says, too, that education may be the consequence of greater prosperity and comfort, of more frequent washing, as he says, but not of being able to read and write. Well then, I'm very glad, or the contrary, very sorry, that I'm in agreement with Spencer, only I've known it a long time. Schools can do no good. What will do good is an economic organization in which the people will become richer, will have more leisure, and then there will be schools. Still, all over Europe now schools are obligatory. And how far do you agree with Spencer yourself about it?" asked Levin. But there was a gleam of alarm in Zviashki's eyes, and he said, smiling, "No, that screaming story is positively capital. Did you really hear it yourself?" Levin saw that he was not to discover the connection between this man's life and his thoughts. Obviously, he did not care in the least what his reasoning led him to. All he wanted was the process of reasoning, and he did not like it when the process of reasoning brought him into a blind alley. That was the only thing he disliked, and avoided by changing the conversation to something agreeable and amusing. All the impressions of the day, beginning with the impression made by the old peasant, which served, as it were, as the fundamental basis of all the conceptions and ideas of the day, threw Levin into violent excitement. This dear good Zviashki, keeping a stock of ideas simply for social purposes, and obviously having some other principles hidden from Levin, while with the crowd, whose name is Legion, he guided public opinion by ideas he did not share, that irascible country gentleman, perfectly correct in the conclusions that he had been worried into life, but wrong in his exasperation against a whole class, and that the best class in Russia, his own dissatisfaction with the work he had been doing, and the vague hope of finding a remedy for all this, all was blended in a sense of inward turmoil and anticipation of some solution near at hand. Left in the room assigned him, lying on a spring mattress that yielded unexpectedly at every movement of his arm or his leg, Levin did not fall asleep for a long while. Not one conversation with Zviashki, though he had said a great deal that was clever, had interested Levin, but the conclusions of the irascible landowner required consideration. Levin could not help recalling every word he had said, and in imagination amending his own replies. "Yes, I ought to have said to him, you say that your husbandry does not answer because the peasant hates improvements, and that they must be forced on him by authority. If no system of husbandry answered at all without these improvements, you would be quite right. But the only system that does answer is where laborer is working in accordance with its habits, just as on the old peasant's land halfway here. Your and our general dissatisfaction with the system shows that either we are to blame or the laborers. We have gone our way, the European way, a long while, without asking ourselves about the quality of our labor force. Let us try to look upon the labor force not as an abstract force, but as the Russian peasant with its instincts, and we shall arrange our system of culture in accordance with that. Imagine, I ought to have said to him, that you have the same system as the old peasant has, that you have found means of making your laborers take an interest in the success of work, and have found the happy mean in the way of improvements which they will admit. And you will, without exhausting the soil, get twice or 3 times the yield you got before. Divide it in halves, give half as the share of labor, the surplus left you will be greater, and the share of the labor will be greater too. And to do this, one must lower the standard of husbandry and interest the laborers in its success. How to do this? That's a matter of detail, but undoubtedly it can be done. This idea threw Levin into a great excitement. He did not sleep half the night thinking over in detail the putting of his idea into practice. He had not intended to go away next day, but he now determined to go home early in the morning. Besides, the sister-in-law with her low-necked bodice aroused in him a feeling akin to shame and remorse for some utterly base action. Most important of all, he must get back without delay. He would have to make haste to put his new project to the peasants before the sowing of the winter wheat, so that the sowing might be undertaken on a new basis. He had made up his mind to revolutionize his whole system. End of chapter 28. Okay, chapter 28, the two other landowners have left, and Levin is still staying at Zviashki's, and they are, well, Levin is trying to continue the conversation, and Zviashki is kind of done with the conversation. He is just like ready to talk about new things. And we also get kind of an interesting insight in that Zviashki doesn't talk about things that he doesn't fully understand, and he doesn't have all of the facts for, um, which I think is interesting. And yeah, like that just shows his character, which is really kind of cool. Yeah, it's a smart move. It makes it so that he doesn't, speak without completely knowing, having everything laid out before him and being like, okay, I understand now. Now I can make an educated response, or now I can fully understand my position on this issue after knowing all of the things. And so anytime Levin, tries to throw Zviashki into uncharted territory, Zviashki is like, no, and he like changes the subject, and I kind of like that. And something that is just so human is that after the discussion and Levin goes up to where his bed is to stay the night, he's thinking about the conversation. And he's like, okay, I should have said this. Ah, yeah, okay, this is the response I should have said, which I think is so human, like such a human thing to do, to be like, oh, now that I have had the space, which is what Zviashki does by like physically removing himself from conversation, is taking the time to be like, okay, this is how I'm going to respond. Instead of Levin, who is like, this is how it is. This is what we're going to do. Why don't you believe this? Obviously, we shouldn't educate the peasants. Obviously, they shouldn't go to school, which is not the first time that Levin has said this. And it's just like, my dude, my dude, my dude. So interesting. And it ends with Levin, figuring out how he's going to implement all of his like newfound, strongly held ideas in his own land. And he's like, yes, I'm going to revolutionize the way that labor is done on my land. And that's where that chapter ended. Chapter 29. The carrying out of Levin's plan presented many difficulties, but he struggled on, doing his utmost, and attained a result which, though not what he desired, was enough to enable him, without self-deception, to believe that the attempt was worth the trouble. One of the chief difficulties was that the process of cultivating the land was in full swing, that it was impossible to stop everything and begin it all again from the beginning, and the machine had to be mended while in motion. When on the evening that he arrived home, he informed the bailiff of his plans. The latter, with visible pleasure, agreed with what he said, so long as he was pointing out that all that had been done up to that time was stupid and useless. The bailiff said that he had said so a long while ago, but no heed had been paid him. But as for the proposal made by Levin, to take a part as shareholder with his laborers in each agricultural undertaking, at this the bailiff simply expressed a profound despondency, and offered no definite opinion. But again, immediately talking of the urgent necessity of carrying the remaining sheaves of rye the next day, and of sending the men out for the second ploughing, so that Levin felt that this was not the time for discussing it. On beginning to talk to the peasants about it, and making a proposition to cede them the land on new terms, he came into collision with the same great difficulty, that they were so much absorbed by the current work of the day that they had not time to consider the advantages and disadvantages of the proposed scheme. The simple-hearted Ivan, the cowherd, seemed completely to grasp Levin's proposal, that he should with his family take a share of the profits of the cattle yard, and he was in complete sympathy with the plan. But when Levin hinted at the future advantages, Ivan's face expressed alarm and regret that he could not hear all he had to say, and he made haste to find himself some task that would admit of no delay. He either snatched up the fork to pitch the hay out of the pens, or ran to get water, or to clear out the dung. Another difficulty lay in the invincible disbelief of the peasant that a landowner's object could be anything else than a desire to squeeze all he could out of them. They were firmly convinced that his real aim, whatever he might say to them, would always be in what he did not say to them. And they themselves, in giving their opinion, said a great deal, but never said what was their real object. Moreover, Levin felt that the irascible landowner had been right. The peasants made their first and unalterable condition of any agreement whatever that they should not be forced to any new methods of tillage of any kind, nor to use new implements. They agreed that the modern plow plowed better, that the scarifier did the work more quickly, but they found thousands of reasons that made it out of the question for them to use either of them, and though he had accepted the conviction that he would have to lower the standard of cultivation, he felt sorry to give up improved methods, the advantages of which were so obvious. But in spite of all these difficulties, he got his way, and by autumn the system was working, or at least so it seemed to him. At first, Levin had thought of giving up the whole farming of the land just as it was to the peasants, the laborers, and the bailiff on new conditions of partnership. But he was very soon convinced that this was impossible, and determined to divide it up. The cattle yard, the garden, hayfields, and arable land, divided into several parts, had to be made into separate lots. The simple-hearted cowherd, Ivan, who Levin fancied, understood the matter better than any of them, collecting together a gang of workers to help him, principally of his own family, became a partner in the cattle yard. A distant part of the estate, a tract of waste land that had lain fallow for 8 years, was with the help of the clever carpenter, Fyodor Ryazanov, taken by 6 families of peasants on new conditions of partnership, and the peasant Shrev took the management of all the vegetable gardens on the same terms. The remainder of the land was still worked on the old system, but these 3 associated partnerships were the first step to a new organization of the whole, and they completely took up Levin's time. It is true that in the cattle yard things went no better than before, and Ivan strenuously opposed warm housing for the cows and butter made of fresh cream, affirming that cows require less food if kept cold, and that butter is more profitable made from sour cream, and he asked for wages just as under the old system, and took not the slightest interest in the fact that the money he received was not wages, but an advance out of his future shares in the profits. It is true that Fyodor Ryazunov's company did not plow over the ground twice before sowing, as had been agreed, justifying themselves on the plea that the time was too short. It is true that the peasants of the same company, though they had agreed to work the land on new conditions, always spoke of the land, not as held in partnership, but as rented for half the crop, and more than once the peasants and Ryazanov himself said to Levin, "If you would take a rent for the land, it would save you trouble, and we should be more free." Moreover, the same peasants kept putting off, on various excuses, the building of a cattle yard and barn on the land as agreed upon, and delayed doing it till the winter. It is true that Shuraev would have liked to let out the kitchen gardens he had undertaken in small lots to the peasants. He evidently quite misunderstood, and apparently intentionally misunderstood, the conditions upon which the land had been given to him. Often, too, talking to the peasants and explaining to them all the advantages of the plan, Levin felt that the peasants heard nothing but the sound of his voice, and were firmly resolved, whatever he might say, not to let themselves be taken in. He felt this especially when he talked to the cleverest of the peasants, Ryazanov, and detected the gleam in Ryazanov's eyes, which showed so plainly both ironical amusement at Levin and the firm conviction that, if anyone were to be taken in, it would not be he, Ryazanov. But in spite of all this, Levin thought the system worked, and that by keeping accounts strictly and insisting on his own way, he would prove to them in the future the advantages of the arrangement, and then the system would go of itself. These matters, together with the management of the land still left on his hands, and the indoor work over his book, so engrossed Levin the whole summer that he scarcely ever went out shooting. At the end of August, he heard that the Oblonskys had gone away to Moscow, from their servant who brought back the side-saddle. He felt that in not answering Darya Alexandrovna's letter, he had, by his rudeness, of which he could not think without a flush of shame, burned his ships, and that he would never go and see them again. He had been just as rude with the Zviashkis, leaving them without saying goodbye. But he would never go to see them again either. He did not care about that now. The business of reorganizing the farming of his land absorbed him as completely as though there would never be anything else in his life. He read the books lent him by Zviashki, and copying out what he had not got, he read both the economic and socialistic books on the subject, but, as he had anticipated, found nothing bearing on the scheme he had undertaken. In the books on political economy, in Mill, for instance, whom he studied first with great ardor, hoping every minute to find an answer to the questions that were engrossing him, He found laws deduced from the condition of land culture in Europe, but he did not see why these laws, which did not apply in Russia, must be general. He saw just the same thing in the socialistic books. Either they were the beautiful but impracticable fantasies which had fascinated him when he was a student, or they were attempts at improving, rectifying the economic position in which Europe was placed, with which the system of land tenure in Russia had nothing in common. Political economy told him that the laws by which the wealth of Europe had been developed, and was developing, was universal and unvarying. Socialism told him that development along these lines leads to ruin, and neither of them gave an answer, or even a hint, in reply to the question what he, Levin, and all the Russian peasants and landowners were to do with their millions of hands and millions of acres to make them as productive as possible for the common weal. Having once taken the subject up, he read conscientiously everything bearing on it, and intended in the autumn to go abroad to study land systems on the spot, in order that he might not on this question be confronted with what so often met him on various subjects. Often, just as he was beginning to understand the idea in the mind of anyone he was talking to, and was beginning to explain his own, he would suddenly be told, "But Kaufman, but Jones, but Boys, but Mikeli. You haven't read them. They've thrashed that question out thoroughly." He saw now distinctly that Kaufman and Mikeli had nothing to tell him. He knew what he wanted. He saw that Russia has splendid land, splendid laborers, and that in certain cases, as at the peasants on the way to Zviashki's, the produce raised by the laborers and the land is great. In the majority of cases where capital is applied in the European way, the produce is small, and that this simply arises from the fact that the laborers want to work and work well only in their peculiar way, and that this antagonism is not incidental, but invariable, and has its roots in the national spirit. He thought that the Russian people whose task it was to colonize and cultivate vast tracts of unoccupied land consciously adhered, till all their land was occupied, to the methods suitable to their purpose, and that their methods were by no means so bad as was generally supposed. And he wanted to prove this, theoretically, in his book, and practically on his land. End of chapter 29. Okay, chapter 29. So now that he is all hopped up on his ideas to revolutionize the way that his land is being labored, he goes back and he talks to, several different laborers, and he's getting various degrees of agreement. And it's already like time. They're already working on things in the old way, the way that they were doing. And now he wants them to just completely switch things. And some of the laborers have like demands or requests. Like they don't want to learn new equipment, and they don't want to learn specifically like a method, like those types of things. And so Levin is just getting more and more excited, and he's dividing things, and just it's all work talk, and he's getting hyped up on this idea, and he's doing a lot of research. He's reading all of the, socialistic, political, and also like land laboring books that he can find, both for like Russian land, but then also how European workers, laborers, landowners are running their land. And he's getting ideas, and some of them are great and some of them aren't. And it seems like he is not necessarily challenging himself, And he is only being excited and hyped by the opinions that are already his opinions, and he's looking at it as validation. And the ones that he doesn't like or doesn't agree with or whatever, he doesn't see as like a personal benefit for him, or he doesn't see it as a benefit for his laborers, like school. He just dismisses the idea, and he's like, well, these books say this, so they're the right ones, and these other people are just wrong. Like, it just doesn't apply to me. Chapter 30. At the end of September, the timber had been carted for building the cattle yard on the land that had been allotted to the Association of Peasants, and the butter from the cows was sold and the profits divided. In practice, the system worked capitally, or, at least, so it seemed to Levin. In order to work out the whole subject theoretically and to complete his book, which, in Levin's daydreams, was not merely to effect a revolution in political economy, but to annihilate that science entirely, and to lay the foundation of a new science of the relation of the people to the soil, all that was left to do was to make a tour abroad, and to study on the spot all that had been done in the same direction, and to collect conclusive evidence that all that had been done there was not what was wanted. Levin was not Levin was only waiting for the delivery of his wheat to receive the money for it and go abroad. But the rains began, preventing the harvesting of the corn and potatoes left in the fields, and putting a stop to all work, even to the delivery of the wheat. The mud was impassable along the roads. 2 mills were carried away, and the weather got worse and worse. On the 30th of September, the sun came out in the morning, and hoping for fine weather, Levin began making final preparations for his journey. He gave orders for the wheat to be delivered, sent the bailiff to the merchant to get the money owing him, and went out himself to give some final directions on the estate before setting off. Having finished all his business, soaked through with the streams of water which kept running down the leather behind his neck and his gaiters, but in the keenest and most confident temper, Levin returned homeward in the evening. The weather had become worse than ever towards evening. The hail lashed the drenched mare so cruelly that she went along sideways, shaking her head and ears. But Levin was all right under his hood, and he looked cheerfully about him at the muddy streams running under the wheels, at the drops hanging on every bare twig, at the whiteness of the patch of unmelted hailstones on the planks of the bridge, at the thick layer of still juicy, fleshy leaves that lay heaped up about the stripped elm tree. In spite of the gloominess of nature around him, he felt peculiarly eager. The talks he had been having with the peasants in the further village had shown that they were beginning to get used to their new position. The old servant to whose hut he had gone to get dry evidently approved of Levin's plan, and his own accord proposed to enter the partnership by the purchase of cattle. I have only to go stubbornly on towards my aim, and I shall attain my end, thought Levin. And it's something to work and take trouble for. This is not a matter of myself individually. The question of the public welfare comes into it. The whole system of culture, the chief element in the condition of the people, must be completely transformed. Instead of poverty, general prosperity and content. Instead of hostility, harmony and unity of interests. In short, a bloodless revolution, but a revolution of the greatest magnitude, beginning in the little circle of our district, then the province, then Russia, the whole world. Because a just idea cannot be fruitful. Yes, it's an aim worth working for, and its being me Kostya Levin, who Kostya, Kostya, Kostya Levin, who went to a ball in a black tie and was refused by the Shtcherbatskaya girl, and who was intrinsically such a pitiful, worthless creature. That proves nothing. I feel sure Franklin felt just as worthless. And he too had no faith in himself, thinking of himself as a whole. That means nothing. And he too, most likely, had an Agafea Mikhailovna to whom he confided his secrets. Musing on such thoughts, Levin reached home in the darkness. The bailiff, who had been to the merchant, had come back and brought part of the money for the wheat. An agreement had been made with the old servant, and on the road the bailiff had learned that everywhere the corn was still standing in the fields, so that his 160 shocks that had not been carried were nothing in comparison with the losses of others. After dinner, Levin was sitting, as he usually did, in an easy chair with a book, and as he read he went on thinking of the journey before him in connection with his book. Today all the significance of his book rose before him with special distinctness, and whose periods ranged themselves in his mind in illustration of his theories. I must write that down, he thought. That ought to form a brief introduction, which I thought unnecessary before. He got up to go to his writing table, and Laska, lying at his feet, got up too, stretching and looking at him as though to inquire where to go. But he had not time to write it down, for the head peasants had come round, and Levin went out into the hall to them. After his levee, that is to say, giving directions about the labors of the next day, and seeing all the peasants who had business with him, Levin went back to his study and sat down to work. Laska lay under the table. Agafea Mikhailovna settled herself in her place with her stocking. After writing for a little while, Levin suddenly thought with exceptional vividness of Kitty, her refusal, and their last meeting. He got up and began walking about the room. "What's the use of being dreary?" said Agafea Mikhailovna. "Come, why do you stay on at home? You ought to go to some warm springs, especially now you're ready for the journey." "Well, I am going away the day after tomorrow, Agafea Mikhailovna. I must finish my work." "There, there, your work, you say? As if you hadn't done enough for the peasants. Why, as 'tis, they're saying, your master will be getting some honor from the Tsar for it. Indeed, and it is a strange thing. Why need you worry about the peasants?" "I'm not worrying about them. I'm doing it for my own good." Agafea Mikhailovna knew every detail of Levin's plan for his land. Levin often put his views before her in all their complexity, and not uncommonly he argued with her, and did not agree with her comments. But on this occasion she entirely misinterpreted what he had said. Of one's soul's salvation, we all know and must think before all else, she said with a sigh. Parfen Denisitch, now, for all he was no scholar, he died a death that God grant every one of us like, said she, referring to a servant who had died recently. Took the sacrament and all. That's not what I mean, said he. I mean that I'm acting for my own advantage. It's all the better for me if the peasants do their work better. Well, whatever you do, if he's a lazy, good-for-naught, everything will be at 6s and 7s. If he has a conscience, he'll work, and if not, there's no doing anything. Oh, come, you say yourself Ivan has begun looking after the cattle better. All I say is, answered Agafea Mikhailovna, evidently not speaking at random, but in strict consequence of idea, that you ought to get married. That's what I say. Agafea Mikhailovna's allusion to the very subject he had only just been thinking about hurt and stung him. Levin scowled, and without answering her, he sat down again to his work, repeating to himself all that he had been thinking of the real significance of that work. Only at intervals he listened in the stillness to the click of Agafea Mikhailovna's needles, and recollecting what he did not want to remember, he frowned again. "Well, here's visitors come to us, and you won't be dull," said Agafea Mikhailovna, getting up and going to the door. But Levin overtook her. His work was not going well now, and he was glad of a visitor, whoever it might be. Okay, end of chapter 30. The book went back a page, and I was like, excuse me, we already read that. End of chapter 30. Okay, chapter 30. Levin is all ready to go, but the weather has other ideas for him, so not everything has been harvested, so he's not leaving yet. And he's chatting with Agafea Mikhailovna, who is the house manager, and she knows all of his plans of revolutionizing the land or whatever. And she just pretty much ends it with hey, you should get married. Chapter 31. Running halfway down the staircase, Levin caught a sound he knew, a familiar cough in the hall. But he heard it indistinctly through the sound of his own footsteps, and hoped he was mistaken. Then he caught sight of a long, bony, familiar figure, and now it seemed there was no possibility of mistake. And yet he still went on hoping that this tall man taking off his fur cloak and coughing was not his brother, Nikolay. Levin loved his brother, but being with him was always a torture. Just now, when Levin, under the influence of the thoughts that had come to him, and Agafea Mikhailovna's hint, was in a troubled and uncertain humor. The meeting with his brother that he had to face seemed particularly difficult. Instead of a lively, healthy visitor, some outsider who would, he hoped, cheer him up in his uncertain humor, he had to see his brother, who knew him through and through, who would call forth all the thoughts nearest his heart, would force him to show himself fully, and that he was not disposed to do. Angry with himself for so base a feeling, Levin ran into the hall. As soon as he had seen his brother close, this feeling of selfish disappointment vanished instantly and was replaced by pity. Terrible as his brother Nikolay had been before in his emaciation and sickliness, now he looked still more emaciated, still more wasted. He was a skeleton covered with skin. He stood in the hall, jerking his long, thin neck and pulling the scarf off it, and smiled a strange and pitiful smile. When he saw that smile, submissive and humble, Levin felt something clutching at his throat. "You see, I've come to you," said Nikolay in a thick voice, never for 1 second taking his eyes off his brother's face. "I've been meaning to a long while, but I've been unwell all the time. Now I'm ever so much better," he said, rubbing his beard with his big, thin hands. "Yes, yes," answered Levin, and he felt still more frightened when, kissing him, he felt that his lips the dryness of his brother's skin and saw close to him his big eyes full of a strange light. A few weeks before, Konstantin Levin had written to his brother that through the sale of the small part of the property that had remained undivided, there was a sum of about 2,000 rubles to come to him as his share. Nikolay said that he had come now to take his money and, what was more important, to stay a while in the old nest, to get in touch with the earth so as to renew his strength like the heroes of old for the work that lay before him. in spite of his exaggerated stoop and the emaciation that was so striking from his height. His movements were as rapid and abrupt as ever. Levin led him into his study. His brother dressed with particular care, a thing he never used to do, combed his scanty, lank hair, and smiling, went upstairs. He was in the most affectionate and good-humored mood, just as Levin often remembered him in childhood. He even referred to Sergei Ivanovich without rancor. When he saw Agafea Mikhailovna, he made jokes with her and asked after the old servants. The news of the death of Parfen Denisitch made a painful impression on him. A look of fear crossed his face. But he regained his serenity immediately. Of course, he was quite old, he said, and changed the subject. Well, I'll spend a month or two with you, and then I'm off to Moscow. Do you know, Mayakov has promised me a place there, and I'm going into the service. Now I'm going to arrange my life quite differently, he went on. You know, I got rid of that woman. Maria Nikolaevna? Why? What for? She was a horrid woman. She caused me all sorts of worries. But he did not say what the annoyances were. He could not say that he had cast off Maria Nikolaevna because the tea was weak, and, above all, because she would look after him as though he were an invalid. Besides, I want to turn over a new leaf completely now. I've done silly things, of course, like everyone else, but money's the last consideration. I don't regret it, so long as there's health, and my health, thank God, is quite restored. Levin listened and racked his brains, but could think of nothing to say. Nikolai probably felt the same. He began questioning his brother about his affairs, and Levin was glad to talk about himself, because then he could speak about hypocrisy. He told his brother of his plans and his doings. His brother listened, but evidently he was not interested by it. These two men were so akin, so near each other, that the slightest gesture, a tone of voice, told both more than could be said in words. Both of them now had only one thought, the illness of Nikolai, and the nearness of his death, which stifled all else. But neither of them dared to speak of it, and so whatever they said, not uttering the one thought that filled their minds, was all falsehood. Never had Levin been so glad when the evening was over and it was time to go to bed. Never, without any outside person, never on any official visit, had he been so unnatural and false as he was that evening. And the consciousness of his unnaturalness, and the remorse he felt at it, made him even more unnatural. He wanted to weep over his dying, dearly loved brother, and he had to listen and keep on talking of how he meant to live. As the house was damp, and only one bedroom had been kept heated, Levin put his brother to sleep in his own bedroom behind a screen. His brother got into bed, and whether he slept or did not sleep, tossed about like a sick man, coughed, and when he could not get his throat clear, mumbled something. Sometimes when his breathing was painful, he said, "Oh my God." And sometimes when he was choking, he muttered angrily, "Oh, the devil." Levin could not sleep for a long while, hearing him. His thoughts were of the most various, but the end of all his thoughts was the same. Death. Death, the inevitable end of all, for the first time presented itself to him with irresistible force. And death, which was here in this loved brother, groaning half asleep and from habit calling without distinction on God and the devil, was not so remote as it had hitherto seemed to him. It was in himself too. He felt that. If not today, tomorrow, if not tomorrow, in 30 years, wasn't it all the same? And what was this inevitable death? He did not know, had never thought about it, and what was more, had not the power, had not the courage to think about it. I work, I want to do something, but I had forgotten it must all end. I had forgotten death. He sat on his bed in the darkness, crouched up, hugging his knees and holding his breath from the strain of thought he pondered. But the more intensely he thought, the clearer it became to him that it was indubitably so, that in reality, looking upon life, he had forgotten one little fact, that death will come, and all ends, that nothing was even worth beginning, and that there was no helping it anyway. Yes, it was awful, but it was so. But I am alive still. Now what's to be done? What's to be done? He said in despair. He lighted a candle, got up cautiously, and went to the looking-glass and began looking at his face and hair. Yes, there were gray hairs about his temples. He opened his mouth. His back teeth were beginning to decay. He bared his muscular arms. Yes, there was strength in them. But Nikolay, who lay there breathing with what was left of lungs, had had a strong, healthy body too. And suddenly he recalled how they used to go to bed together as children, and how they only waited till Fyodor Bogdanich was out of the room to fling pillows at each other and laugh irrepressibly, so that even their awe of Fyodor Bogdanich could not check the effervescing, overbrimming sense of life and happiness. And now, that bent, hollow chest, and I not knowing what will become of me, or wherefore. Damnation, why do you keep fidgeting? Why don't you just go to sleep? His brother's voice called to him. Oh, I don't know. I'm not sleepy. I have had a good sleep. I'm not in the sweat now. Just see, feel my shirt. It's not wet, is it? Levin felt, withdrew behind the screen, and put out the candle, but for a long while he could not sleep. The question how to live had hardly begun to grow a little clearer to him, when a new, insoluble question presented itself. Death. Why is he dying? Yes, he'll die in the spring, and how help him? What can I say to him? What do I know about it? I'd even forgotten that it was at all. End of chapter 31. Okay, chapter 31. So we ended chapter 30 with Levin talking about why he can't leave because of the crops and everything. And it's a good thing that he didn't leave because his brother just like shows up and his brother's like, I'm gonna stay here for a couple months. Enjoy. And his brother is just like a skeleton of who he used to be. He is very, very thin. His skin is like very sunken in. His hair is just like really like lanky and just very thin, and he's dying. He's dying. And but he keeps saying like, I'm in better health than I was before. And Levin asks like, well, what happened to, your lady friend? And his brother is like, I got rid of her. She made weak tea. But that's not the real answer. The real answer was because she had to take care of him. And in taking care of him, I think, he saw the reflection of just how unable to take care of him he was. And saw the reflection of like her perception of him, and like seeing that he is changing through how she is acting towards him, or how she is, responding, or whatever. And so like he's no longer with them, and has come here to Levin to be like, there is, we have to discuss money. We know before that there are three brothers, and the land wasn't divided equally when their dad passed, and they just sort of like had a kind of agreement, and so now there is a discrepancy, and so that is why his bro has come, and he's gonna stay there, and his brother is just like coughing and coughing and just like getting frustrated. So like which is so relatable, especially if you're trying to sleep and you have a cough that just like won't go away, or like a tickle in your throat that just like won't go away. And it's just like that frustration, that like buildup of like, why is my body failing me? And that's great. And the whole conversation of like death itself, I think Tolstoy did a great job with it. It's not something that is brought up in like every book, and if it is, it's like different tonally. So I think it was done very well. Like there is a fear of it, but it's an inevitability, and just like the realization of like, wow, I have never had to actually face mortality like I am right now. And Tolstoy is also making us face it as well with the descriptions of a brother and the actions that they have to go through. All right. Last chapter in part 3. Exciting. Chapter 32. Levin had long before made the observation that when one is uncomfortable with people from their being excessively amenable and meek, one is apt very soon after to find things intolerable from their touchiness and irritability. He felt that this was how it would be with his brother. And his brother Nikolai's gentleness did in fact not last out for long. The very next morning he began to be irritable, and seemed doing his best to find fault with his brother, attacking him on his tenderest points. Levin felt himself to blame, and could not set things right. He felt that if they had both not kept up appearances, but had spoken, as it is called, from the heart, that is to say, had said only just what they were thinking and feeling, they would simply have looked into each other's faces, and Constantine could only have said, "You're dying. You're dying." And Nikolai could only have answered, "I know I'm dying, but I'm afraid. I am afraid. I'm afraid." And they could have said nothing more, if they had said only what was in their hearts. But life like that was impossible. And so Constantine tried to do what he had been trying to do all his life, and never could learn to do. Though, as far as he could observe, many people knew so well how to do it, and without it there was no living at all. He tried to say what he was not thinking, but he felt continually that it had a ring of falsehood, that his brother detected him in it, and was exasperated at it. The third day, Nikolai induced his brother to explain his plan to him again, and began not merely attacking it, but intentionally confounding it with communism. You've simply borrowed an idea that's not your own, but you've distorted it and are trying to apply it where it's not applicable. But I tell you, it's nothing to do with it. They deny the justice of property, of capital, of inheritance, while I do not deny this chief stimulus. Levin felt disgusted himself at using such expressions. But ever since he had been engrossed by his work, he had unconsciously come more and more frequently to use words not Russian. All I want is to regulate labor, which means you've borrowed an idea, stripped it of all that gave it its force, and want to make believe that it's something new, said Nikolai, angrily tugging at his necktie. But my idea has nothing in common. That, anyway, said Nikolai Levin, with an ironical smile, his eyes flashing malignantly, has the charm of, what's one to call it, geometrical symmetry, of clearness, of definiteness. It may be a utopia, but if once one allows the possibility of making of all the past a tabula rasa, no property, no family, then labor would organize itself, but you gain nothing. Why do you mix things up? I've never been a communist, but I have, and I consider it's premature but rational, and it has a future, just like Christianity in its first ages. All that I maintain is that the labor force ought to be investigated from the point of view of natural science. That is to say, it ought to be studied, its qualities ascertained. But that's utter waste of time. That force finds a certain form of activity of itself, according to the stage of development. There have been slaves first everywhere, then metayers, and we have the first crop system, rent, and day laborers. What are you trying to find? Levin suddenly lost his temper at these words, because at the bottom of his heart he was afraid that it was true. True that he was trying to hold the balance even between communism and the familiar forms, and that this was hardly possible. I am trying to find means of working productively for myself and for the laborers. I want to organize, he answered hotly. You don't want to organize anything. It's simply just as you've been all your life, that you want to be original, to pose as not exploiting the peasants simply, but with some idea in view. All right, that's what you think, and let me alone, answered Levin, feeling the muscles of his left cheek twitching uncontrollably. You've never had, and never have, convictions. All you want is to please your vanity. Very well, then leave me alone. And I will let you alone. And it's high time I did, and go to the devil with you. And I'm very sorry I ever came. In spite of all Levin's efforts to soothe his brother afterwards, Nikolay would listen to nothing, he said, declaring that it was better to part. And Constantine saw that it simply was that life was unbearable to him. Nikolai was just getting ready to go when Constantine went in to him again and begged him, rather unnaturally, to forgive him if he had hurt his feelings in any way. Ah, generosity, said Nikolai, and he smiled. If you want to be right, I can give you the satisfaction. You're in the right, but I'm going all the same. It was only just at parting that Nikolai kissed him, and said, looking with sudden strangeness and seriousness at his brother, Anyway, don't remember evil against me, Kostya. And his voice quivered. These were the only words that had been spoken sincerely between them. Levin knew that those words meant, see you, and know you, that I'm in a bad way, and maybe we shall not see each other again. Levin knew this, and the tears gushed from his eyes. He kissed his brother once more, but he could not speak, and knew not what to say. 3 days after his brother's departure, Levin, too, set off for his foreign tour, happening to meet Sherbatsky, Kitty's cousin, in the railway train. Levin greatly astonished him by his depression. "What's the matter with you?" Sherbatsky asked him. "Oh, nothing. There's not much happiness in life." "Not much. You come with me to Paris instead of to Mulhausen. You shall see how to be happy." "No, I've done with it all. It's time I was dead." "Well, that's a good one," said Sherbatsky, laughing. "Why, I'm only just getting ready to begin." "Yes, I thought the same not long ago. But now I know I shall soon die." Levin said what he had genuinely been thinking of late. He saw nothing but death, or the advance towards death, in everything. But his cherished scheme only engrossed him the more. Life had to be got through somehow till death did come. Darkness had fallen upon everything for him, but just because of this darkness he felt that the one guiding clue in the darkness was his work, and he clutched it and clung to it with all his strength. End of the chapter. And end of part 3. Heck yes. Okay, so that chapter we have just two brothers going at it. Just arguing and just like, I'm not saying that like Nikolai is nitpicking, but just asking questions and being like, why are you doing this? There's already a system here. You're trying to be original when this thing is already happening. What are you doing? And Levin is just like getting all like agitated, as he usually does when people are pointing things out. He's just getting really agitated. And so they're both going back and forth. And it's not just two brothers arguing or disagreeing or whatever the case is. It's one brother on the verge of death and the other seeing mortality on top of. So that's like an added layer to the discussion that they're having. And at the end, they do have, one moment. There's a line that says like, if they actually spoke from the heart, all they would be saying was, "You're dying," and "I know I'm dying, and I'm scared." And so neither of them actually say that. And so they are just clinging to this argument that they're going through and their ideals that they're warring with. And it is decided that Nikolai is going to leave. And yes, he forgives Levin, of course, but that doesn't change the fact that he's going to leave. And he leaves him with parting words. And the words have surface level meaning, sure, but also like a much deeper meaning in that this might be the last time I see you. It might, this could be it. And they both know this. And so his brother leaves, and a couple days later, Levin leaves. And so he's still holding on to his grief of having all of this, like, piled on his shoulders. And he meets one of the Sherbatskoys at the train station, and he is just like having a great time. He's on his way to Paris, and Levin's like, "No, I'm going over here. Like, I'm gonna do this work thing." And he's like, "Well, like, life is fun, life is great." And Levin's like, "All I can think about is death and how I'm going to die soon." And so, with that mentality, Levin is holding on to what is kind of, but not really, the only concrete thing in his life, which is his work. And so, he is holding on to it as much as he possibly can. And he is going to just force this will to happen, force his way of thinking that the work should be done this way. He's making it happen. There's this visual that is like when you're holding onto a rope and it's like tied around your wrist, and the like tighter you hold onto it, the more the rope is just like digging into your skin and just like causing you so much pain, and that sometimes you just have to release it and let go and get that like freedom, and also just like the release of all things painful. So what a way to end the third part, and it makes me curious of what we're getting into for the fourth part. We have had, of course, serious conversations and serious themes in this book, but this one just leaves with such a heft to it that where the other two parts didn't. Again, we're only three parts in. We just finished the third part. We have so much to go. This might, like, the first two parts just might be like outliers. You know what I mean? The other ones might also end doom and gloom and, this is the way it is and whatever. But I'm still really enjoying it. I am enjoying Tolstoy's writing. I am enjoying especially the way that he's writing his characters. I really do hope that Levin is propelled with this new look into like growing as a character instead of just being crybaby Levin. And that he like does have growth and like terrible circumstances in order to have that shift. But I do hope that he grows as a character. I I don't even know like what other hopes I have for the other characters. I don't know, because I am just so interested to see where they all go. And I have no like predictions either. Like I have so many ideas, I guess, but like I have nothing like this is definitely going to happen to Anna or this is definitely going to happen to Daria. Like I don't know. I don't know. I guess we just have to keep reading. Life is suffering and death is inevitable. The end. So we're gonna end today. We are gonna start part 4, chapter 1 next time. But yeah, thank you all for being here. It was a pleasure, as always. Whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. If I didn't see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. Bye.